Hello everyone. Today I'm going to take you on a journey through the next part of my life, from when I left my father's house and I moved into my mother's house in Romford in Essex. She was a schizophrenic. She had incredible mood swings and sometimes, it didn't work out so well, but it's my story. And if that interests you at all, then stick around. Let me begin by describing my mother's personality to you, so you will understand how things went in her household. First of all, my mother was capable of incredible generosity and kindness. That was one side of her that I saw often, and so did everybody else. However, she did have another side. Now, I never knew at the time that she was diagnosed in Malaya with schizophrenia. So when she would have visions, I thought she was psychic. And, you would, wouldn't you? You're not that old, you don't have much worldly experience, and mental health wasn't a thing in those days. You didn't have TikTok or YouTube or any of those things to find out, what's going on in her head. She was quite a chaotic individual. Her house, her bungalow, reflected that. It was clean, but it was incredibly messy. Stuff would land where she put it, and it wouldn't be moved, and it would pile up on top of each other. And looking back on it now, I think her surroundings reflected what was going on in her brain, because it always looked chaotic. So when I first moved in there, I would tidy up, and she would appreciate that. She did. She appreciated that and everything that I did, because I felt I needed to earn my way to stay there. She might have been my mother, but this home she was sharing with another man who would later go on to be her husband. And I felt I needed to have some worth. I needed to pay my way, and I didn't have any money, so I did all those sort of things that she wasn't too keen on, like ironing and tidying up. And then eventually I got a job. Well, not even eventually, very soon I got a job down the town in a baker's shop. And I can't remember, my wage for the week was 12 shillings. That's 60 pence in today's money. But I was really chuffed. And then I would give it to her because, she fed me. So I was still talking and phoning my boyfriend. It very soon became apparent that my mother's partner, who was a foreman of a building site in London, wanted to go back to Ireland because he was Irish. He wanted to go back to his home country in Ireland, Southern Ireland, and build a house for them. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go with them. So it was decided that I would go and live with my boyfriend's parents in their house with my boyfriend. My mother and her partner would move to Ireland and leave me with my boyfriend under my boyfriend's parents' care. That was okay for the first few weeks. There was a novelty value. But it very soon became apparent that my boyfriend's mother, the person who would eventually become my mother-in-law, did not like the way I spoke. I didn't speak correctly for her. So that was a source of aggravation. And I don't know, maybe it's mothers and sons or something, but there was always something wrong. She was the kind of person that would have somebody in, one of her family members, in her kitchen, and she would be chatting away to them and chatting about another family member. But as soon as that person had left, she would tear them to shreds behind their back. It didn't matter that they were her own children. She would tear them to shreds with another child. So I knew what was being said about me. And I never liked confrontation at all. I sought to hide from it. I just didn't want to be told off. I didn't want to be shouted at. I mean, I'd had a lot from my mother, so it takes a lot to behave even worse than her, but sometimes it did feel like it. For example, when I was at my mother's house, she had a habit of getting something in her, a little bee in her bonnet, and I knew she was ruminating on it, and she would come into the room. I mean, she'd done this all my life when I was with her, so I knew the format. And she would come in and say it was about a dinner plate. I'm making this bit up. She would come in and she'd say, well, I don't like that dinner plate, I don't. And then she'd go out of the room, and a few minutes later she'd say, and what's more, you brought that dinner plate into this house, and for goodness knows what reason, I don't like it, and you can just take it out. And this would go on for about half an hour, by which time she had worked herself up into such an angry frenzy that she would be right at your face and pointing a finger at you and shouting. And I can remember once she said, who do you think you're looking at? And the one and only time I answered back, I said, you. And, oh gosh, you only do that once and you learn your lesson. She became absolutely apoplectic, and I never, ever, ever did it again. I would just sit there with the blankest expression on my face, so not to add to her annoyance at me. And I would shake. That's probably where all my shaking began. I would shake from head to toe. So you didn't say anything to her, and then, gradually, once she'd reached that absolute frenzy, then she'd go out of the room, and then about half an hour later, she'd come back in again, totally normal. And she said to me once, what's the matter with you? And I said, you're angry with me. And she said, oh, I can't stand people who sulk. And she just didn't get it. it just wasn't on her radar. She didn't realise, that, what she'd been doing. And I didn't want to confront her. I don't think I would have ever confronted her. Confrontation is something that I really don't like. So, yes, one night she was in one of these moods, and no, it wasn't about a dinner plate. I think it was about my boyfriend. And she started off at the low pace, and then gradually over the next half hour, she worked herself up into a frenzy. The culmination of which, because by this time it was the evening, she came into the room and she said, and these are her words verbatim, "Don't you fall asleep tonight, because so help me God, I will come in here and stab you." I have no idea what my face showed when she did that. Probably, no, I wouldn't have done that, because that was a face. I would have tried to be blank. Well, then she left the room and she went to bed. And I sat in front of that door and waited and waited. And I was actually just waiting for her to come in here, in the room with a knife. And she probably wouldn't have known she did it. But I stayed awake all night. And the next morning, she got up, and I must have looked a bit pasty, actually, because, not sleeping, and I think it does show when you haven't been to sleep. And she said, she would do this, "Oh, what's the matter with you?" And I said, "I didn't sleep last night." And she said, "Why ever not?" And I said, "Because you told me not to go to sleep, otherwise you'd come in here and stab me." And she said, "Oh, did I? That's a terrible thing to say." That was it. So you had to be careful around my mum. The two sides of her, the nice one and the chaotic, out of control one, were polar opposites of each other, and often done in equal measure. So whilst I went there to be safe, I don't think I actually was. And I often wonder how she maintained her relationship with her boyfriend or partner, I don't know. It must have been very difficult. I think it must have been difficult for my father, but then again, he didn't think it would be difficult for me. Actually, he never phoned to find out if I got there, which is astonishing, really. But there you go. So I went to live with my boyfriend's parents. Now, his father was much older than his mother. And he was a little bit creepy. He would say inappropriate things. I realise they're inappropriate now. I just thought they were creepy at the time. But they were wildly inappropriate now, I think about it. Growing up does make you more aware And when you're younger, you don't think like that. It's only with the benefit of hindsight and revisiting these times, I think back and I think, God, what a creep. So that wasn't good. His mother, well, she didn't like the way I spoke. That wasn't good. And very soon after moving in with them, I realised that it wasn't a happy situation. And also, I think because I was living there, my boyfriend thought it was fine that he could then just leave me behind and his parents would sort of babysit me. I had no autonomy over anything, any part of my life. And he would go out with his mates and just leave me behind, which wasn't ideal. So in the end, I wrote to my mother again and said, can I come and stay? So I left and I went to visit my mother, who was, by this time, she and her partner were living in a caravan on the roadside of a road in Ireland, whilst they looked for a plot of land on which to build their dream house. The thing that I remember most about that caravan was that it was small, but it smelt of nice food. My mum was a great cook, plain cook, but always incredibly tasty. And the caravan smelled of that aroma, so that was a pleasant memory. And very soon, after a very short while of living with my mum in the caravan and her partner, she decided that I should become a model. I think it's because she always wanted that for herself. It didn't come from me. So, I don't know how she even found this modelling agency, to be honest. I've no idea, but she did. She found a model agency in St Stephen's Green in Dublin. It was called the Charles Ward Agency, and they had a modelling school attached to it. So clearly she thought, that's it, that'll be my girl. And so we went up there, and she paid for the modelling course, obviously enrolled me into it, paid for it, and then she gave me £10, which, to be honest, was quite a lot of money in those days. It doesn't sound much now, but in those days it was quite a bit. And she left. She left. I was still 15. We hadn't found somewhere for me to stay. And you know what? I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh well, I'll go and find somewhere to stay. It astonishes me now that at 15 I didn't think that was odd. I just accepted it and thought, oh well, I'll find somewhere to stay. I don't know how I found this hotel, but I did find it. It was a bed and breakfast in Ballsbridge, which is about half an hour's walk from St Stephen's Green. So I got my bag and I got a map and I walked there, and when I got there it was a nice enough house, clean but freezing. It was freezing. And in those days I don't think many people had ensuite bathrooms or anything. There was a sink, the water was cold, and there was no heating in the room. I think people must have been tougher in those days. And the lady that ran the B&B, didn't want you hanging around in that room during the daytime either. So you slept there, you had your breakfast, and then you left, and then you didn't come back until the evening, which actually, that was fine, because I had that course to go to and I was busy all day. I'd have to get up early to walk the half an hour from Ballsbridge to St Stephen's Green. I enjoyed the course. It was interesting learning how to walk, things like that. Meeting the other models, the ones that were successful, not, people like me just learning how to walk. They were famous in their field in Dublin. And after, I suppose once they taught you how to walk, you started getting small jobs that they could earn money from you. For example, I got a job with 3 other girls on that course going to Butlins for a fashion show once a week, and we did actually feel a bit like royalty because they paid for us to have a taxi all the way there and all the way back, and we got lunch in the cafeteria. Clearly I had very low expectations of what being treated like a celebrity is, but it was good for me. Plus we got paid £10 in cash. Now, that was great. But before we got to that stage, I was still at this B&B, and gradually my money was running out. So I had to contact my mother through a pub that was in the village, no mobiles, a pub in the village, and they would get a message to my stepfather, who would go to that pub. It was also where they had all their mail sent. So I said, the money has run out. I have no more money, and could you send me a bit more, please? And she did. She did send me another £10. So that helped, because what I never realised, apart from this show in Dublin, in Butlins, I never realised that if you're a model, you do a job and then you wait for 3 months before that job gets paid for. And so you've got no money coming in apart from this £10 a week. That was a rude awakening. And if you were trying to live in a rented accommodation, you had to make sure that your money stretched a long, long way. My accommodation during that time became more and more problematic. It was expensive to stay in a B&B. And at one time I met on one of these fashion shows, not the one in Butlins, but a different one. I was talking to a young male model who was working on the same show, and I said, I've got a real problem staying somewhere. It's so expensive. And he said, I'm sure my mother would let you a room. And they did. His mother was such a sweetheart, so kind, so generous. I moved in within a week in their home, and I had a lovely little room, and his mother fed me an evening meal. Their family was lovely. Their family had been nicer to me than my own, frankly. And it was lovely being around really kind people. So from that house, I was able to get another modelling job as a showroom model in Mary Street in Dublin. The company that I modelled for had a factory upstairs, and they manufactured blouses, trousers, skirts, etc. And all of these items, these clothing items, would be viewed by boutiques that would come into the factory, and then I was the person that would try them on and show the buyers from these boutiques what they look like on. And the benefit of that was that I was allowed to keep those items of clothing, which was, it was good. It was a very generous perk. And also, we would fill the van up and we would travel over from Dublin all the way to Birmingham and places like that, and take them round to various boutiques in those areas. We'd go over on the boat and then we would sell them. So that's how I knew about Birmingham. Eventually, I somehow got a letter from my ex-boyfriend. There have been so many things that happened in my life that sometimes I have difficulty in putting them in order. But I still have the memories. And I remember getting this letter from him and saying, please come back. I miss you, blah, blah, blah. And so I did. And he said, we'll get married. We'll get a home. And you know what? I think it was probably those two sentences that hooked me. I desperately wanted a home to call my own. For most of my life thus far, I had been a lodger in somebody else's home, including my parents. I was a lodger in their home. An unwanted lodger as it was, but nevertheless it wasn't my home, and I desperately wanted a home to call my own. And that's the worst reason to get married. And of course I did. I went back to him. We arranged a wedding. I got a second-hand dress. We got some veil material and made my veil, so that was new. But I got the second-hand dress. I didn't have anyone, my parents didn't come from my family, and I was given away by a dear friend. But that was it. So the wedding photos were a little bit not even. And that began my marriage, which wasn't happy. We were still living at his parents'. But I think having that ring on my finger made things a whole lot worse. His behaviour became, just not very nice. And he was incredibly controlling, even from the point when we were first going out. But, it wasn't a thing in those days. Honestly, in those days, it was, my boyfriend's very controlling, and he must love me. He really must love me. But actually, no, that's not the case. It takes you to grow up, to find out about these things, and to reflect. And it was all about control, not about love at all. So our marriage did not get off to a good start. We were still living with his parents. So we ended up getting married in the November, a few weeks before my 17th birthday. It was not a happy time. What I thought was bad behaviour before I left the first time, with this ring on my finger, gave him carte blanche to treat me however he wanted. And he was horrible. There weren't any rows because I didn't. But what I did do is I ran away. I ran away to Birmingham because I thought I knew that place. I arrived in New Street Station with my small basket that I left the house with. I mean, if you're running away, you can't take much with you because it looks obvious. And I ran away and I had to find somewhere to stay. So I asked the taxi driver if he could take me to a reasonably priced bed and breakfast, and he was very kind and he took me to, I think it was Edgbaston. Now I know these days, I now know that there is a cricket ground there, but in those days it didn't really come into my mind. However, he took me to this bed and breakfast and it was clean, it was nice, and I paid for a week whilst I looked for a job. I was 17 and not old enough to work in a pub. However, one of the girls called Lily, who cleaned at this bed and breakfast, was really sweet, and she worked in a pub around the corner. And she said that she would see if she could get me a job. And she did. So I worked behind the bar at this pub around the corner from this bed and breakfast, and very soon my money was getting, it had gone, despite the job. And Lily said, come and stay with me in my flat. It was the top of this other house, just down the road from the B&B. It was very poor. The heating just came from a gas fire, that most of the elements, there's little bits of white pottery stuff that's in the fire. Most of those are gone, so you just have the flames coming out, but it didn't retain much heat because of the lack of these things. It was a top floor flat and it was very cold, and they only had one bedroom, so I slept on the sofa, and I was grateful for it. You can get kindness from people in so many places that you appreciate forever. She was a kind lady. So I carried on living there and working in the pub. I think I must have got in contact with one of my friends. Maybe it was somebody who knew my husband. And I'd already spent the Christmas there because the people that rented the flat, Lily and her husband and her sister Regine, had gone back to Northern Ireland for Christmas, so I had spent an exceptionally lonely Christmas in this very small, drafty place and it was cold. And I had obviously written a letter in one of my down times, and this person had shared my address with my husband. And he wrote to me. Now, I think he was dyslexic because his spelling was appalling and he never had a way with words. But I got this letter and it was so different to the way he'd been treating me. He sounded like he really regretted his behaviour. Then he was saying things like, please come back. It'll all be different. We'll have a baby. And we'll get somewhere to live and everything will be fine. You know what I'm going to say now. So I fell for that, and he came up to Birmingham and I think he brought me back, but it didn't change. We did get pregnant, and as soon as I was pregnant, he wanted me to abort the baby. His mother gave me gin and orange, hot gin, and I had to have a hot bath. Now, I don't know, that must have been an old thing, because they really did believe that it would cause me to miscarry, but it didn't. He just didn't want the baby, despite all that. I don't know what he was doing, because it just didn't make any sense to me that he would say, oh, please come back, blah, 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 and we'll have a baby and all the rest of it. And then as soon as I was pregnant, get rid of it. I don't know. But anyway, he did. But it didn't happen. So that was baby one. And after that baby, I got the most dreadful postnatal depression. It manifested itself in that I couldn't stay awake. I would fall asleep, like sitting here talking to you. My eyes were closed and I'd fall asleep. I had a job working in a betting shop on the counter, and if there were nobody around, or if somebody wasn't talking to me straight away, I would fall asleep. I mean, it was unsustainable. It was just the worst time. It lasted for months. Anyway, I gradually recovered from that. I don't know, I can't remember how, but it was not a happy time. And during that time, I got a letter from my mother who said, I'm in a hospital. She was in the middle of a psychosis, thinking that people were out to get her. And there was nothing I could do about it. By that time, we'd got a cancer flat, and we decided to have another baby. Now, by this time, he had got over the fact that he was now a parent. During my pregnancy, I can remember somebody asking him what he was hoping for, and he said a rabbit. Twit. Anyway, we went on to have another baby. This time another little girl. And we were still in this flat, and the following year we had another baby, but this time it was a boy, and you already know what happened with that baby. His name was Christopher. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.